G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David. Thanks for tuning in and to recognise and reward you for the time that you're spending with us. We want to bring in some awesome guests. Now, today's guest is someone that I mentioned to him before. He's getting a great reputation. He's getting some great raps. He's been featured and interviewed by Mark Boris. So obviously you're doing something very right when you're interviewed by the big fella there. 9 News, Domain, for example. Author of a great book, 6 Principles to Retire Younger and Richer, which has got me very curious as to how to do that. So we'll cover that off as well. I want to say g'day to Dan Walsh. Welcome onto the show.
Thanks for having me, mate. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mate, I really appreciate it. And we're just having a quick chat before about what you're doing. I'm very excited to kind of pop the hood on your portfolio, talk about what you've done. You know, you started investing from what, 19? I mean, you still look about 9, you still look 20. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. It hasn't aged me too well. Then. Oh, I feel like I'm 40, but yeah.
I can tell you, being 40, man, I'd kill to go back to being 19. And there's things that you'd redo, like as a young fella. There's things that I definitely redo. Not that you can live in the past, but hey, man, like I see people making mistakes, like expensive cars, for example, at a young age, toys, blowing money, not saving. You go, mate, if you just got on the right path, property can be a real game changer. It's obviously changed your life. Your entire generation, bloodline will be the beneficiaries of decisions that you've made. So I really want to go deep on what you've done and how you've done it as well, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. Great.
So your company is Your Property, Your Wealth. Take us through what I call the 3 Ps, a little about yourself personally, a bit about yourself professionally, and a bit about your property journey, which we'll go deeper on.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I am a property investor. I always tell people that you have to have a self-identity of yourself and who you are. So for me, I've always, even though I was, started off driving freight trains and having a job, I always identified myself as a property investor, and I was just doing a day job so that I could be a property investor. And yeah, so personally, always been a property investor. I started studying property investing when I was 15 years old. So like I was quite young.
How does a 15-year-old scratch that itch?
It was hard because I couldn't actually afford a house until I was 19. So it was hard because I had to spend many years learning around property investing and not actually get in the game. But there was like a 4-year period of seeing things go up in value, seeing people winning around me that could get into the game. And I had to spend the first 4 years of my career learning and essentially trying to save for my first deposit. Like everyone, you try and save for your first deposit is quite difficult. So yeah, it was definitely hard. It wasn't something I guess I enjoyed when I started. 15-year-old kid typically wants to go ride motorbikes and do stuff like that.
That's what I'm thinking.
It wasn't something I enjoyed, but I recognized when I was younger that if I ever wanted to have a meaningful life and have, be able to provide for my family in a good way, that I had to sit down and take control of my future. And I knew that very early. It's a very odd thing to probably realize, but I think my parents drummed it into me. My parents used to flip properties when we were younger. So it always had that idea of like, okay, property may be the way for me as well. And I dropped out of school at 15, so I dropped out of school. I knew that I wasn't ever going to be earning massive money. I thought to myself, you know what, my friends around me are becoming lawyers and everything like that. That's what they want to do. They're all going to be super wealthy and I'm going to get left behind because I'm going to be this, tradesman that's just not going to go anywhere. So I was almost afraid, I think, at a young age that I was never going to amount to very much because I dropped out of school. So I focused my energy on saying, well, how do I build a portfolio so young that it compounds in growth that the time that all my friends got out of university and even started earning $1, I was a millionaire. And that was my goal, was like, can I become a millionaire before anyone even starts working from my friends group? And can I get that I guess, nest egg early as possible?
That is, that's uncommon thinking.
Yeah, very different. I was different as a child, let's say that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around it because I'm like, I speak to adults that still haven't got that concept. I'm talking like 40-somethings. And it's often, I look at, there's some buyer's agents, obviously the circle's, tight, and I get to see, we've been a lot of buyer's agents, and they weren't they weren't uni qualified, they didn't go down the professional route, and they're like, well, I have to make up my money somewhere else, and their money then, and they're not earning significant incomes. I mean, you're 19. I've got to be guessing you're earning sub $50,000, 60K at that point.
Yeah, well, for me, I was at 19, was still an apprentice. So I
Wow.
was an apprentice auto electrical in auto electrical trade. I think I was on about 700 a week, 600 a week, or
Mm,
something like that when I did it. I had to come up with 34,000 for my first deposit to buy the property, bought the first property, and then leveraged that into the second property and just sort of went from there. But it was very tough times. Like, I don't think anyone starts off their journey and thinks it was easy. Like the first two, three, four properties is like really tough. It feels like a grind. And I remember thinking to myself, this is just so slow. I felt like I wasn't doing well. I felt like I wanted 10 properties, but it's like, will I ever get there?
mm,
And I think that's a very normal thing for most people to think, is like, it is slow. And I didn't come from a background where I had like been given anything. So it was like, start from ground zero, don't make a mistake, because I'll have to own that mistake on my own,
absolutely.
and I would have to live with it. So I was really conscious of learning, really conscious of understanding. So I was like taking in a lot from older investors. At the time I was 16 years old, I was listening to investors that were 45, 50 years old that had been in the game for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, if I can learn from them, I I won't be landing on as many landmines throughout my journey, and I can listen to them. So I used to just sort of listen to how they strategized around building wealth, and that kind of molded my own sort of thesis around investing to be able to do it.
Yeah, kudos to you, mate. Now you've made it very public about your portfolio. I mean, your book kind of covers, what you bought, how you built it up. So a portfolio that's worth $16 million,
Yeah,
thereabout,
20 now, over 20.
over
Yeah, over
20.
20 minutes. Yeah.
Does that, I mean, because you had that intention as a youngin, and now where you are in life, it may not surprise you because you always set out to achieve it. But as you reflect back, do you just go, Jesus, like mission accomplished here, or do you not rest on your laurels, going, I'm still on this journey, and I have this amazing talent. Shouldn't I just shoot for the stars?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely go through different emotions about it. Like, there's some days where I think like I achieved everything I wanted to achieve, and then there's some days where I feel like, you know what, I could achieve five times more. I think that is just a fight that you have within yourself. That when you get to a stage of, I don't probably need to work anymore. That stage of like, do I pull my foot off the pedal and just be happy with what I've been able to build, or do I keep pushing forward to say, no, I can do more. Um, and I think that to me is just always looking at it saying, well, for one, do I enjoy what I do? And if I enjoy it, I'll keep going. Number two would be, do I want to get 10, 15, 20 years down the track and then think to myself, you know what, I quit and sat on a beach for 15 years. Will I look back at that period of time and say, did I waste 15 years of my life sitting on a beach, or, not doing very much, right? And I think anyone that creates some form of success, whether it's business, whether it's, investments or whatever, they have some sort of drive behind them. I think we were just talking about it off air before, where I'll go on holidays and I'll think I need a holiday, and I'll be on a holiday for 2 days, and then I'll start working on something. I'll be doing something. And that is my personality. My personality is, even when I take a break, I am working. For most people, when they take a break, they switch off completely and they're like, that's it, it's time to switch off. I go take a break and I actually switch on more than I've ever switched on. And I think it's because I get total clarity around no one bothering me for maybe a week. And then that makes me even more ambitious when I come back into it. You detach yourself from the chaos to the point where you see what you want to do, and then you go back and then you start to achieve it. So yeah, I think it's a very up and down journey, and I think that journey gets harder the more successful you get.
Mm,
Look at these guys that are billionaires. They do not have to work. Why do they work, right? There has to be something else. For me, I think it is purpose driven. It is, I started my business on purpose. My purpose was to make sure that I teach people the right way of investing, that no one gets hurt, that I don't get hurt by property spookers. That was my biggest thing
mm,
when I started. People buying brand new off the plan properties and getting ruined. I didn't want that. So I was trying to teach people the right way to invest. And I think I still have that ownership within myself to say, if I stop helping people, and I don't want to do that. Not yet anyway.
All
So
right, so when we look at like the one and something that you've mentioned there is about working with the top 1% of investors. Now that's obviously it's a mission for ours. I think we are a bit silent about it because when we talk to people, it's like, hey, look, how do we get them there? I don't think we're overtly talking about it, but I love that you've brought it to the surface, and I really want to go there. You probably come across a lot of people who have the means and the ability, i.e. they've got the borrowing capacity and they've got the equity, but something stops them from getting there. What have you seen?
always mindset. Mindset stops everyone, even if they have the means to get there. I see that, and you see that, look at anyone that's in their 30s, 40s, 50s that have bought a property, generally will have equity in their property. Why don't they go out there and buy more assets? And the reason for it is, I think, financial literacy. It's not taught. I think that people don't have the financial literacy to be able to be comfortable taking on more debt and building more of their asset base. I think that people don't understand that, saving money is not the people, I guess from our generation and our parents' generation, they've always been taught, save money, pay off your house. That's freedom, right? Like that's what freedom is. But I think now we're seeing it even from the baby boomers, and that is, it's not freedom. Now they're starting to get to the point where they're like, I did pay off my house. I did everything correctly. I spent till I was 65 years old working, and I still can't retire a happy life. I still don't have a nest egg. And that's just because their dollar just kept devaluing over that time. And instead of acquiring more assets so that they got wealthier against the dollar, they were trying to save, right? And every time they saved money, that dollar just kept getting devalued, right? So I think that's why most people don't get there. I think mindset holds them back more than ever, which is why I created the book. The book was, for me, trying to figure out what made me successful. I think it was a book more for myself than anyone else. And I thought, if I can get clear on why I became successful, what habits made me become successful, what train of thought and mindset did I have to become successful? Because I came from the average middle class background, your blue collar worker. I, was a tradie. I drove freight trains, and I'm thinking, how did I leave that world to become to where I am? But no one else could follow me in that world. Like I was trying to tell them how to get out of their own world. I was talking to train drivers saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I was talking to them every day about it. And I got out, and they're all like, geez, how did you get out? And I'm like, I need to put this down, so I can understand it for myself. Because if I can understand it for myself, I could teach it. So that's where the book came from in the end.
No, well done. Let's go back to the 1%. I'll come back to the book in a little bit. But the 1%ers. So for those that are unfamiliar, this is what the ATO numbers have shown. There's over 2 million Australians that are property investors. Of this number, 70% own one investment property, 20% own two investment properties, 6% own three, 2% own four, and they say just 1% of investors own 5 properties, and less than 1% owns 6 or more. Now, these numbers, so when you look at it on a population of, say, 26 mil, that's less than 100,000 own 4 or more investment properties. That number surprises me because I feel like I come into contact with so many people, naturally in our line of work, that have multiple investment properties. So my view of the world is very skewed, that I'm like, I deal predominantly with a lot of people have a portfolio. And these numbers are taken from 2021. So I feel like it's pre-COVID, the boom, for example, and also there's been a significant rise in the number of buyers agents as well who are making property investing a little bit more either mainstream or accessible as well. Do you think if they were to do those numbers now, there would be an increase, or do you think it's just been natural attrition where investors have come out to replace the ones that have churned effectively, come out of the market, and new ones have come in?
I don't think that number would change that all that much, right? And the reason I think that is because I think most people have a mental block, mindset block to build a portfolio, even if they have the choice to do it. A lot of people have the choice to buy 2, 3, 4, 5 properties, but they don't, and I think the reason for it is just a mindset block. So I think that most people, even if they do acquire 1, 2, or 3, they generally will sell those properties as soon as they make a profit because they don't have any financial literacy on how to continue to build wealth. So I think that most people go, I made $300,000 out of that asset, bang, sell it. They want to realize the gain because it's a middle class mindset to think I need the money in the bank, I need to pay down debt. So because of that, they're trying to get comfortable, right? Most of the time that people do that, and the middle class mindset is they are trying to run away from a job that they hate. And the reason that they do sell their assets in the end after a 2 or 3 year period is because they feel like getting 200 grand or 300 grand in the bank account will solve the problem of them hating their job. And it's just not the case. They get the 300 grand in the bank account. It's not a safety net in the end. They realize that, hey, I have to put the 300 grand back to work if I want to keep building my wealth. And if I keep it in savings, it's just going to get devalued. And it didn't solve the problem that I still hate my job, even though I have 300 grand in my bank account, or I paid my mortgage off by 300 grand, right? So I think most people are trying to solve that problem rather than build wealth. And that's why I don't think that really changes all that often. People are trading properties to solve that problem more so than build long-term wealth that's generational.
Wow. So what is that generational, and we speak about intergenerational wealth a fair bit as well. What does that look like to you? Is it a buy and hold long term? Is it a buy a few, sell some down?
I think intergenerational, like if generational wealth and passing down to your children can be assets and it can be knowledge as well, right? So generational wealth can be a wealth of knowledge, right? If you have the knowledge to be able to acquire and become wealthy, then you pass that down to your children. You don't have to give them anything. You don't have to give them a property. You don't have to give them assets, but you can give them knowledge to be able to acquire those assets to be able to become wealthy themselves. So generational wealth, yes, by definition would be you passing money down or passing assets down to your children. But I think that most people miss that. If you pass down money or assets to your children, but they do not have financial literacy on how to control those assets, they will probably lose that generational wealth within 1 to 2 generations. And it's proven that happens. And that's because the second generation did not have the appreciation for the first generation on how hard it was to create. And they do not have the financial literacy to understand how to maintain it. I talk about it in the book, The 5 Stages of Money Success. And the 5th stage is maintaining money, right? After you've made your money, you've multiplied it, invested it, and done everything you need to do, you have to maintain it. The 5th stage, maintaining money, is the hardest part of the entire journey. Most people would think making it would be the hardest part, but it's not. Anyone can go out there and trade their time for money. How do you maintain what you've built? And how do you pass that on to somebody else so that they can maintain what you've built? I think that is the key. That's why, a lot of people lose their wealth within 2 or 3 generations. So I would say pass on knowledge more than assets. Yes, pass on assets, but pass on wealth through knowledge. I think that's going to be the key, which is why if you see people that are in that are wealthier, and then you see people that are in the, say, let's just for argument's sake look at Sydney. If you look at people in the eastern suburbs and look at people in the western suburbs, why do the people in the eastern suburbs stay wealthier? Well, for one, their assets keep growing at a great rate. But what's happening is they're passing down skill sets. They're passing down knowledge on how they got there, right? And then they're teaching their children how to maintain what they've built. And people in the western suburbs don't even have a parent to teach them how to maintain it because they haven't got anything to maintain. So you're starting from ground zero, and that's what I had to start from. I was Western Sydney, that's where I grew up, and no one came to you and said, "Oh, this is how you build wealth. This is how you maintain wealth. This is what you need to do." So there's no blueprint to be able to help those people that have never been taught it, and they're not surrounded by those people that have success around them. Whereas, the people in the eastern suburbs, everywhere you look, someone's had a successful business, someone's had successful assets, someone has, been able to invest very well. You have the ability to tap into somebody else's knowledge very quickly. And I think that's one reason.
Mate, correct. Yeah, we're both products of the western suburbs, and I talk about this. I look around, I go to the gym. There's some young blokes around there, and they've got their haircuts. And I'm like, at 15, the only real estate you have is pretty much on your head.
Yep.
And so you see the funky haircuts.
And that disappears.
Mate, don't even. And then it's like the next bit of real estate's your phone, 18-year-old, and then it's the car, and then it's the travel, for example, mate. That's effectively the real estate. When I looked around our colleagues in the western suburbs, no one was buying property.
Yeah.
And you're probably the exception to the rule, mate, where you're buying property at that age, right? Whereas,
Yeah, no one was I mean, no one, even in my immediate friend group, five immediate friends, not
yeah,
one person had bought a property. And everyone, in fact, had told me in my personal friend group that I was stupid for doing that because they were buying brand new cars, right?
yeah,
So I remember back in the day, they're driving the brand new, F6s,
mm,
Fords, turbos, and they're like, and I'm driving this old Kia Rio that can't even keep up with them. But I was just always sticking to, I just always knew that, okay, that car's going to depreciate. You're not going to be able to maintain that life forever if
mm,
you keep spending your money. And if I live very frugally, then I will one day be able to buy whatever I want and maintain that for the rest of my life. So I think the biggest thing is, can you maintain what you're doing forever? Or can you not? A lot of people, for example, these days will rely on their income and then maintain a specific lifestyle based on their current income.
absolutely.
What they don't realize is, though, you're not going to have that income forever. We only have so much energy. We only have so much time. So therefore, as we get older, we deplete our energy. The more we deplete our energy, the less likely we want to hustle as hard as we did in our 20s and 30s if we're 40s and 50s.
Mm,
I recognize that I have more energy at 20 and 30 than I will at 50. So therefore, I don't want to hustle at 50. I want to be like chilling on a boat doing what I want at that period of time. So I was always in a hurry to make sure that I got enough wealth that I did not have to rely on an active income, which depleted my energy to transfer into my lifestyle. A lot of people are living off a lifestyle that is not sustainable. I say to people all the time, how about, if you had a look at it, let's see how much you can sustain. Let's look at what your net worth is. Now look at a 5%, 6% return on your net worth. Now that's all you can spend for the rest of your life. How long can you live for, and what life can you live? Most people wouldn't have a very good life, right? Like you turn around and go, most people would like living on $10,000 a year if that was the case, because they haven't built a net worth. So I always say make sure that you build a net worth large enough that if you that when you have to live off your passive side of your income, which eventually you will, then you have enough of it to maintain the lifestyle that you actually want. And I've got rough rule of thumbs, right? I call it success habits. One of my success habit was, as I was growing up, never spend more than 10% of my net worth on liabilities. Never. So, if I have $1 million, for example, I can spend $100,000 on liabilities at that point. $10 million, I can spend $1 million on liabilities. And when you do that, and you maintain that same percentage the whole way through, you will find that naturally, when you're younger, you cannot afford to go buy brand new cars and go on holidays and do all this sort of stuff, because you're not spending any more than 10% on those liabilities. So you're keeping your asset ratio to liability ratio in check forever.
beautiful. Which brings me on top of, and you've mentioned a few times, middle class. I feel like this is blowing up. This like working hard for their money's not working hard for them. The amount of like white collar professionals that I talk to that are solid 6-figure incomes. I'm talking like the top income earners. But then we look under the hood, it's like there's not much left over. And maybe call it the cost of living squeeze, call it commitments with kids or family. There's also a lifestyle creep element to this as well. But you think about like 200, 250 grand. He said that coming out of uni, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming for. They get there and they don't feel any richer.
Yeah.
And they're stuck on this treadmill going, right, the next thing I'm just have to get to that next promotion, for example, the next bonus. But when you look at the lifestyle, it's spent before it's actually received as well. And I just want to get your thoughts on how do you see people breaking this effective, like this circuit that they're on, of this middle class treadmill?
Yeah. So to me, middle class is a mindset. It's not an income. And the reason I say that is because you could go from being extremely wealthy to being broke and then back to being wealthy. But when you were broke, you didn't go back to being middle class, because your mindset is that you can create what you had created before. So I think that mindset is, are you a middle class? Well, it depends on the mindset and how you perceive money. I think that's one of the biggest things that people need to understand. So in terms of breaking a middle class mindset, you need to understand money and how it actually works. Most people just typical middle class mindset: buy a house, get a corporate job, climb the ladder, get your $250,000 a year. That'll solve all problems and pay down your mortgage. That's your typical middle class. but it's broken these days because your dollar is getting devalued at a rate that your $250,000 doesn't feel like $250,000 like it did 5 or 10 years ago. Which is why I keep telling people that your income should only be controlling the assets that you bought. You should be learning how to cash flow and control assets with your income. So you increase your income to control more assets because your assets are going to go up in value as the dollar devalues. But if you use, which most people do, they use their income to pay down their mortgage. The mortgage that they pay down is savings, which means they're actually getting every dollar they put into their mortgage is devaluing. So that's why they're feeling poorer. Like, I'm putting money into my mortgage, but I feel like I'm getting poorer. Yeah, because everything's going up around you, right? It's like the tide is rising. So if the tide is rising around you and you have life rafts, what are the life rafts? Buying more assets using debt. The middle class hate debt. It's like, but that's where the life rafts are. You have to acquire more debt, and then you need to have your income to make sure that you can control the life rafts that you have so that you don't drown. But most people go, no, 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 that's not the way to do it. Get out of debt. Well, getting out of debt is you drowning quicker. And they don't see that because they think, oh, that's going to get me out of it, because if I pay my mortgage down, I'm going to be debt free. No one should be debt free until they get to a point where, when they do become debt free, they never have to work again because they've acquired so many assets, right? So, for example, if I buy 5 properties, 10 properties, let's say I buy 10 properties, I sell 5 to pay off 5. Okay, maybe then I want to be debt free because I can own 5 in cash, right? And I can get an income for the rest of my life that's going to increase with inflation. That's one way of doing it. But people are trying to get out of debt before actually creating a net worth, right? Before you've actually created anything, you're trying to get out of it because, again, they hate their jobs. So I tell people, like, what you need to do is you need to focus on, okay, the life rafts are assets, right? Because as the dollar loses value, these assets go up in value over the long term. Who cares about the short term, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, right? If we look over a long period of time, what mattered more, the interest rate that you had or the assets going up in value? What was would your cost of, or sorry, your standard of living go backwards more because of the interest rate, or did your standard of living go back more because of the inflation rate devalued your dollar and the assets went up so much? I would say the interest rates were irrelevant. As long as I had my income to control my interest rates and control my properties, the interest rate is irrelevant, right? As long as I can control it, because a lot of people say, oh, but it is relevant. It's a middle class thing. As long as I can control it, it is not irrelevant. It is not relevant, right? So same thing, me controlling my assets. My asset, let's say I buy one investment property. This is just very simple terms. I buy one investment property, goes up 200 grand. Release $50,000, stick it in an offset account, let it drain down. Who cares about the interest rate? Now that might get me 10 more years because I use 50 grand to cash flow that asset. Now I don't even need to cash flow it. The property itself is cash flowing itself by doing that. Let's say I did that for 10 years. Do you think you at least make your 50 grand back? Yes. Okay, cool. How much did you make? 300 grand, 400 grand? So people don't understand that, that the debt is what actually makes you wealthy. People always say, well, how did you do it, Daniel? I got into more debt. I understood that the government was going to, acquire more debt on their end. So their balance sheet goes up and they're going to spend that money into the economy. And that's going to make its way into the economy and devalue everyone's wealth, or devalue everybody's dollar. So I just understood that. I'm like, well, if the government's doing that, then why don't I jump on the same strategy that the government's doing, acquire more debt? What are they doing? Acquiring more debt. So why wouldn't I do the exact same thing, right? Now, if they stop acquiring debt and they say, no, we're going to get our balance sheet under control. No, we are not going to spend more than 3% of GDP every single year. And they do that for a long-term strategy. Well, then everything changes. But until then, their strategy is take on more debt, monetize the debt every 3 to 5 years, put it on the balance sheet, and take the interest rate. That's what they're doing, and just continually doing the process. So I just do the exact same thing. It allows me to become super wealthy over time because I let the assets do the heavy lifting for me. And I'm not thinking about, like, my first house I bought for 324 grand. It's worth 850 to 900K. I did not pay a dollar down, and I had a 95% LVR when I started. My LVR is so low on that property, and I've never paid a dollar off it. So people think that to drop your LVRs, you have to pay it off. No, you just have to wait the time I would rather buy 10 assets, not pay any of them off, but control them and let the dollar do its thing over time, which means that my assets are going to become a lot more expensive over time. And that's essentially all I'm doing.
So does that then go into property selection in terms of like this is a fairly long term buy and hold as opposed to a trading mindset, which is I buy here and I sell up here on a property?
Yeah, yeah. So I typically will be long term. A lot of my stuff is I want to try and hold it for forever if I can, right? Because again, if I'm trading property, I'm trading in and out of a property. There's obviously entry costs, exit costs. The problem is as well is if I hold let's say I hold my property, it goes from 500 grand to a million. That's great. But the second cycle is going to supercharge my compounding wealth because it'll go from a million to two, right? And then I'll have a rent that goes from $500 a week to 1,000, and then $1,000 a week to $2,000 a week. Might take 20 years, 30 years to do that. But the second and the third time that it doubles, it's exponential returns on the cash that I put into it. And then the same thing as well is as I keep holding these properties, I can get the money out tax free. Why people don't realize what people don't realize is every time they earn a dollar, they're going to lose 30 to 45 cents of that dollar to tax. Every time I make a dollar in equity, I keep a dollar in equity. I do not have to pay any taxes for it. So therefore, I can roll that dollar, which as we keep building, I can keep rolling that into more and more properties, and I'm saving 30 to 45% of all of my wealth, which means I can roll into more property, more assets quicker than anyone else, right? Because if you go to work and lose 35 to 45% of your dollar, and I go to work and lose nothing, who wins at the end of the day? I have more dollars to keep acquiring and putting into more assets. This is why the wealthy keep getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. They aren't realizing the capital gains. They're rolling it into more and more assets until the gains get so big that they can take a small slither of equity tax free and live off it. And they keep the entire asset. So, if I buy $10 million worth of property, it's like, as an analogy, if I go out there and buy a heap of chickens, most middle class people will go out there and go, we're going to have chicken tonight. They kill the chicken. Whereas the wealthy say, no, we keep the chickens, we eat the eggs, right? That's what they do. They want to keep the asset. The asset is the chicken. They want to keep that, and whatever it spits off over time, they'll have those, which is the eggs. And that's what I've realized. If my asset goes up 500 grand, great. I can spend $50,000 on a car tax free and not be guilted for it because I made $450,000 and I spent 50. Who cares? It's irrelevant because 10 years from now, again, that asset keeps going up in value. So that's how I live. I live off a small slither of equity over time, and I balance it out with my cash flow.
Thanks very much. Now, coming to your book, 6 Principles to Retire Younger and Richer. Now, when I read this, my mind immediately goes to, is the goal to retire? And what would I damn do with my time? Right. So is that something that's come up for, I guess, some feedback for yourself? And what was the mindset for you when you put this? And I know having gone through the author process, it really holds a mirror up to like, what are you really trying to put out there? You got to make sure that your message is crystal clear, that you're very galvanizing in what you're trying to say and capture people's attentions with as well. But is the goal for a lot of people to retire younger and richer, or are they just so conditioned to go, I've got to retire when I'm 65, Daniel? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I think when I wrote the book, and the title of the book was You Can Retire Younger and Richer, and whatever that younger and richer is for you, right? So for example, if somebody was like, if I keep on my current path, I will retire at 65, but I could retire younger and richer at 55 if I implement these principles. So that to them is younger and richer, right? I'm going to retire younger and richer because I applied the principles of how I can build wealth to exit the rat race 10 years earlier than what I could have, right? For somebody else, it might be, instead of doing it at 65, I want to retire younger and richer. I read the book at 20, for example. I want to then retire at 40. They may be able to retire younger and richer than the other guy because he read the book at 20 instead of 40, right? So younger and richer is whatever it means to you to be able to retire younger than what you would have without actually acquiring financial knowledge and how to build wealth through those 6 principles. And the principles that I outlined are basically the success habits that I use to be able to create what I did. Because when I looked at it, I thought, if I create another property book And the property book is just like, I bought a property A and bought a property B and crossed this and took equity out here and did it. It's irrelevant, right? Because 10 years goes by and that strategy may not work anymore. So when you have success habits, when you have principles that you live by, you can adapt to anything in the world, right? So, for example, somebody could read this book in America and apply that to what they're doing in America. Someone could do it in Australia. So it's all over the world that you could do this. It's not something where it's like, okay, this is only going to work for Sydney. This is only going to work for Australia. So I wanted to change the game on no, it's not about property, because at the end of the day, it's not even about property. It's not about, it's about how do I change my perception on how I build wealth, and how do I change my identity to be able to build wealth, right? Because a lot of people do not have the belief in themselves that they can even achieve what they want to achieve, right? So, retiring younger and richer, it also about the principles. It talks about income, active income, talks about building, it might be building a business for yourself, right? That's also going to help you retire younger and richer. It's all of that that goes into the book so that people can retire younger and richer in whatever way they want to do it. It can be through, I talk about business, I talk about assets, I talk about cryptocurrencies, I talk about everything about that. And then you find what you want to do to be able to help yourself retire younger and richer.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I guess it really challenges this norm of work hard, pay off your mortgage, be a 30-year loan term, just continue to bunker down, save up as much as you can, maybe buy, and the hardest part is when people feel like they've got to pay off their mortgage before they can go and invest as well. That's a real mindset shift for some people. And a lot of our listeners are becoming better, sophisticated investors, but there's a big proportion of Australians go, oh, I can't use my family home, or I have to wait till my mortgage is paid off before I should invest. And it's like brain damage alert. But your notion of how do you bring it forward in your life, so how do you start to enjoy life on your own terms? I feel it's a message that is somewhat refreshing, but also confronting at the same time.
Yeah, I think it is confronting. And I think I like to challenge that concept of like, I'm going to pay my mortgage off first. The reason people would think that is they think it's safer to do that. I'm going to get my debt under control and then I'm going to invest a small sliver, which again comes back to that middle class mindset of like, I've got to make sure everything's under control because I don't actually understand how to build wealth. And why I challenge that is because I say, okay, who has more risk? The guy that pays off his mortgage, but he's 50 or 45 and he finally pays his mortgage off, then he starts to invest, but he's only got 15 more years left or 10 more years left. He now only has a 10 to 15 year window to create the wealth that he wants. What happens if he bought the property at 30, right? He buys his first property at 30 and he starts investing by 35, right? He gets to a point where he's getting a bit of equity in his property and he can start investing. He's 35 years old and he's investing. Okay, he might have 25 years left. Who has more risk? The guy that has 10 to 15 years left to make it happen, or the guy that has like 25 years left? I know for me, if I'm looking at saying, well, I'm going to invest with a 25-year horizon, my risk is pretty much zero, right? Do you think it'll go up over 25 years if you buy or acquire an asset? Of course it will. You think you can make it happen in 10, maybe 5? I get people that the same thing. I get people to come to me, Daniel, I finally paid my house off. I'm 55. When do you want to retire? Yesterday. Well, okay, so how long do you have? Well, 5 years. Well, you have some significant risk. You want to acquire assets and try and get this all done in 5 years. Why didn't you do this 20 years ago? I was focusing on paying off my mortgage. Yeah, but all those properties around you went up in value. Do you think it would have been more wise to buy more assets around you 25 years ago? Do you think that would have been less risk now looking back? And every one of them would say, oh, of course it's less risk. I would have had 25 years to make sure that the asset worked for me. Now you've got 5 years to make sure it works for you. So I actually think that getting into more debt younger, you have a lot less risk because you have more time on your side. Getting out of debt and then coming back into debt at a later age at 50, 55 is a harder thing to do because you are more susceptible to not take on as much debt because you think to yourself, I don't have the time and I do not have the risk appetite anymore to risk what I had built already. You do that same thing to a 35-year-old. They're like, I'll risk everything to get what I need because I feel like I have 25 years to make sure the risk curve is somewhat diminished over that time because I have time on my side. And that's how I thought. In my 20s, I'm like, I go real hard. Why wouldn't I? take on as much debt as I possibly can, let it devalue over the next 30 years. I have zero risk if I think 30 years ahead. There's a thing, for example, if you looked at with a 100-year horizon, and you said to yourself, in 100 years, what you had 100 years and you had a property. Do you think the property is going to keep going up in value over 100 years? Yes. Do you think that your savings is going to go to zero in terms of what it can purchase, its purchasing power? Of course it will. So over a 100-year period, your savings is going to go to zero, right? Over a 100-year period, your property is going to continue to grow. Why is there risk? You paying off your mortgage is savings and it's going to zero, right? So why wouldn't you be investing in more assets? And I think one thing I think that people aren't understanding is all money is created these days. Everything keeps getting created, right? So it's not like we just have a heap of savings, right? We have a small amount of savings that is backed by heaps and heaps of debt in our society. So as we increase money supply over the long term, we increase debt. We don't increase money supply via savings. We increase money supply via debt. You go buy a mortgage or go buy a property, you get a mortgage, right? That's debt that got created that never existed before. That is now money in the system. That devalues your dollar for doing that. So understand that, savings is not savings anymore. It is all debt. We just have less debt, right? Like if we took all the savings in our country and then put it against the debt, we still have debt. We have no savings. We have some money that is collateral against the debt. We do not have savings, right? And people act as if they have savings. I see people all the time, I've got $150,000 savings against $1 million loan. You don't. You have $1 million loan minus $150,000 savings, and that's what your debt is. You still have debt. There's no savings. The savings that you think you have is just money that's controlling the debt. And if I go and extract 100 grand out of my property, for example, people would say, no, that's not savings. What's the difference? If I worked hard for my 150 grand and stuck it in an offset account, or I got 100 grand out of my mortgage and stuck it in an offset account, what's the difference? They both are costing me interest if I spend the money. And the only way it doesn't cost me interest is if I pay off my entire debts. And if I pay off my entire debts, which is what most people want to do, I pay off my entire debts, well, what's happening? Well, I'm now getting devalued against the flooded money squared, money supply in the economy. That's over time, I'm getting devalued in the economy. So that's why I'm getting poorer. That's why we're seeing a lot of people get poorer and the middle class get poorer.
Mate, this is going to challenge a lot of people. As I said, coming back to this, is going to challenge a lot of people's thinking. You got a wife, Sophie. Are you guys aligned? Does Sophie think the same way that you do, or does this take some convincing to get your wife on board with your?
No, we're definitely very aligned. I think I'm definitely more of the one that will take charge of like investing and where we're going and what we're doing, especially as things get bigger and everything like that. But in terms of the thesis behind paying off debt, what debt is, how money works, what the financial system looks like, 100% we're aligned. And that's because I think that I've been probably talking about it for like 10 years. So I think it's just over time, she's just like, I understand it, right? And she's seen the real effects of it, right? So I think it's really hard to ignore when you see what has happened in real time. For example, over the last 10 years, how wealthy we've been able to become against some of our friends that have become poor, right? And the difference and why. It's very easy to look at it. So why did somebody become wealthy? Why did somebody, why is somebody not as wealthy, right? And half of these people sometimes earn more money than I do, right? They earn more money than I do, and I became wealthier than them. It sounds backwards. As the fact is, I grabbed onto the life rafts when we had that big flood. I'm grabbing onto the life rafts, and instead of me drowning, I'm getting lifted up while they're drowning, thinking that they're earning more money, but they're paying off their mortgages and they're trying to survive in life. They're the ones that are getting hurt, and I'm the one that's taking the life raft, essentially.
I mean, you mentioned that around your friend circle. That's my next question, which is, it's not that you need to find an echo chamber, but you need to find people around you that can lift your frequency, your line of thinking, for example. And people in their friend circle, they bring this up. First of all, you don't really talk money with friends. Second, you don't talk property either. How do they find people that are uncommon when the common line of thinking is work hard, save, pay off a mortgage, for example? How do they zig when others are zagging?
Yeah, I think today you can do it more than ever. How I did it back in the day, I mean, again, I grew up in the western suburbs. I didn't have those people around me. Most of mine were virtual. Like you can literally talk to anyone around the world if you wanted to. You can connect with people around the world. I think that today you can get onto things like YouTube and really understand the mindset of wealthy people because there's a lot on there that are teaching it. You can do it on, I do it on Instagram a lot, and stuff like that. And I teach people a lot of my philosophies and what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, how I'm moving. So you can then, I guess, that is your proximity, right? You're not proximity physically, but you're still proximity in the way that you're listening because your subconscious mind eventually starts to absorb what it's intaking from information, right? Over long term. It doesn't have to be a person sitting in front of you. That information could be a podcast, it could be YouTube, it could be anything, right? And a lot of my time back in the day when I drove freight trains, I just listened to a lot of podcasts and YouTube and other people that were successful and really just embodied exactly what they were doing and then just kept going on that track because I needed to keep my subconscious mind sharp so that I didn't fall back into the 99%. Because the problem is the 99% of the middle class mindset is so loud these days that you struggle to keep your 1%, 0.1% of the sharpest people and your own mind to be able to say, no, I don't want to fall into the 99% anymore. I want to stay up here. So I think you can do that. Like, look at YouTube, right? There's billionaires on YouTube showing you how they think, right? Which is incredible. How they think, how they process information, how they build successful businesses, how they invest. They teach everything about that. And we didn't have that 20 years ago, whereas now you can literally access a guy that created $1 billion net worth and figure out how he did it, and it's all there for the taking. I think that we're in an era where it's almost there's no excuse if you want to create what something more meaningful in life and become successful and teach others or do whatever you want to do. You literally can do it now from anywhere. Like look at us doing it now. We haven't met in person, but we've been able to share knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's incredible. I want to say thank you very much. Obviously, you shared your knowledge, you shared your journey as well, which I think people will love because and this is no way to discredit what you've done, Daniel, but it's like, hey, if he can do it, I can do it. And that's what people need. They need a blueprint to follow or someone they can go, if they can lead me, they can show me, I can emulate that as well. They just need someone to kind of show them the pathway. So kudos to you, mate, and your community and what you're building out there as well. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you reckon we can get up a couple of books to give away for some listeners?
Yeah, definitely. If we'll have to figure out the logistics of it.
That'll come out later. I'll worry about the detail later. But so
definitely.
Listening, what we love is drop us a DM or tag us and tell us one thing you loved about this episode. And we'll have a couple of books to give out. And we just want to reward people that definitely engage with us, but also just reach out and tell us what they've really enjoyed about it. This book is a resource. I've read it. I've loved it. It's a resource to help you get on that journey. But like you said before, part 5, which is maintaining, which a lot of books don't actually go deep on, which is once you get there, what do you do next? Which I think is really important. So, mate, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll include the details to your business, to your personal socials in there as well. So if people want to stay connected, they can. Daniel, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. If you've loved it or someone's on the journey, we don't worry too much about reviews, people liking us. What we care about is people passing the message on to someone in their network, someone in their sphere that they go, hey, look, I think you should check this episode out. So if you know someone, send them a link to them to this podcast. We want to help more investors become 1% property investors and succeed in the game of property investment as well. That's a wrap. We'll talk soon.